Hello and welcome to China Econ Talk. Today we have guest host and Yenching scholar Sebastian Ryle leading the conversation.
Our guest, Keller Easterling. She's an architect. She teaches at the Yale School of Architecture, and her newest book is Extra Statecraft, The Power of Infrastructure Space. I found especially interesting the chapter on free zones, which is also published as a paper itself by the name Zone, the Spatial Softwares of Extra Statecraft. Thanks a lot for having you here. Maybe for the start, you could explain to our listeners what are free zones.
Well, there have always been pirate enclaves and free ports. The idea is ancient. But the phenomenon that I'm describing in the book is one that perhaps begins in the early 20th century in the United States with something called a foreign trade zone, which was really nothing more than a warehousing compound for storing custom-free trade. But it has evolved in the 20th century. Evolved is one word for it. Mutated in the 20th century to be something that was promoted by UNIDO as a way to jumpstart the economy of developing countries, and then began to kind of hybridize with many other forms. UNIDO thought that the form would dissolve back into the economy of the host country as it would used to be kind of a temporary technique for, but the opposite happened. Everything began to locate within the zone, and as the form started to become more and more contagious around the world, the zone has swallowed the city, so that it's become the germ of a kind of urban epidemic that's creating all the Dubais and Singapores and Hong Kongs all around the world. There are now, thousands in 130 countries, some measured in hectares, some measured in square kilometers. And the next poorest country now thinks they need that zone as a way to attract foreign direct investment. What's central to the zone is that it's an authority independent from the laws and economy of the host country. So it offers to foreign direct investment often no taxes, deregulation of labor and environmental law, cheap labor, streamlined customs, that kind of thing. The incentives to which global corporations have become addicted.
And if you look at the statistics, I find it very interesting that it's a real hockey stick if you look at the number of zones in the world. And so, as you said, the first ones of the new ones came in the 60s, but then it has really taken off. And now most countries in the world actually have some kind of free zones. There are more countries who have free zones than countries who don't have them. And what do you see is the reason that it suddenly really exploded and it's everywhere? For example, I'm based in China now, and we look at the Chinese economy, and many people see the Chinese special economic zones as jumpstarting the Chinese economy. And many people see those pictures of Shenzhen, how it used to be a small fishing village, and now it's this metropolis with 10, 15 million inhabitants. And it seems very attractive for developing countries in the world that they think they can copy this success of Shenzhen. Do you think as well that's an attraction why so many countries now started adopting those, or there are different reasons behind the sudden proliferation of zones everywhere in the developing world mainly?
Well, while the World Bank and some other groups in the 80s were starting to question the zone, whether it was a kind of suboptimal situation, whether it would be better simply to invest in the infrastructure and economy of the host country as opposed to an enclave with special rules. But by that time, by the late 70s, China was using the zone as a market experiment, and also, using once it began to kind of proliferate the idea of zone as its vehicle for entering into the global market, it kind of became a self-fulfilling prophecy. There was no turning around. I think Dubai, the Emirates, the also kind of used that form as a means of entering into the global economy as well, and each country uses it in a different way. But the ways that it was used in both China and Dubai were as cities. So I think the same could be. You could look also at India and India and Singapore using the kind of office park or the kind of office park that's merged with a zone. Dubai did that for the first time, but then the sort of software park merged with the zone. So there's several different places in the world with large population centers that are, or which are generating this idea and generating different forms of the zone. And there are many different forms of the zone. The one thing that they have in common is that they are a kind of incentivized urbanism.
As the world is further and further urbanizing, and we have still big parts of the population that are living on the countryside, and many people project that maybe we will see the biggest push of urbanization within the next decades. Do you think special economic zones are a good way of jumpstarting new cities to give potential home to these people looking to find homes, or is it better to expand existing cities? So I know there are a lot of people are very interested in the idea of creating new cities and then combine also with new regulatory frameworks. So there's the idea, Paul Romer, who's now the chief economist at the World Bank, he's spearheaded this idea of charter cities, which is a very radical approach of starting a new city basically with completely different laws from the country. And that would be an idea to not only provide a new city for people to go, but also jumpstart the economy. But of course, it also has connotations of new colonialism, as it's very inspired by the examples of Hong Kong and Singapore, which were obviously British colonial outposts. But on the other hand, it has also many supporters who think that would be a way of, on a clean slate, to design a well-functioning city with well institutions that can provide something in a dysfunctional country that doesn't exist before and inspire change. What are your views on that? Do you think more it's intrinsically a colonial project trying to place institutions somewhere instead of organically developing them, or is it a good chance of kind of starting from a clean slate and developing something completely new?
Well, the kind of clean slate, one stop is the usual slogans that are attached to the zone, and I think they are the kind of charter city is really just another version of that kind of incentivized urbanism, in my view. So, no, I'm not really so interested in it. It just seems that the best thing to do is to try to find a way to invest in the existing economy, invest in existing cities, and how to do that, how to manage foreign investment in cities, how to make a better bargain with that foreign investment, how to attract it, and so on. It seems to me to be an incredibly interesting design problem. So the clean slate master plan is a pretty boring design problem, or it's not even a design problem. It's just a template for another shiny city. It's just a a blunt instrument, and I'm not convinced that it's done anyone any good. It's more and more evidence that there are clear winners and clear losers in that formula. So, also just it's something that is drained of any vitality.
I find it also interesting that often these zones, they're championed under a very free market ideology, but in the end, if you do urbanism as economic policy, creating a new city, a new zone on a clean slate from scratch, it's a very central planning approach. You don't have this organic development as you have in existing cities where there's a spontaneous coordination and something organically evolves. You actually have to centrally plan everything. So it's a very interesting contrast to the very free market ideology that's behind them. So it's always this tension. Then I wanted to ask you, as our podcast called China Econ Talk, there's been a lot of, the Chinese zones have been very important within China itself, but there's also been a process of exporting this concept, as at least in China people have been very convinced that it was a successful model for China, and now they've spread to Africa, to Ethiopia, for example, where the government is working very closely, to Egypt as well, to Zambia, and a few other places. And do you think they are part of government geopolitical outreach, from China trying to gain a stronghold in these positions and like a neo-colonial project, or should we rather see it as a form of development aid where China is trying to use its expertise and try to benevolently give that to other countries further away?
Well, on the heels of the last question, too, what I'm looking for is a protection of labor, or a way that labor has the protections of the rule of law, which is why I'm also suggesting that investment return to existing cities. So the dangers that accompany the kind of shiny new enclave outside of the existing city, are dangerous to labor, but they're also dangerous to draining away needed infrastructure for in the host country, in existing cities. So I don't see anything different about that in the way that China is taking on big infrastructure projects in Africa, or making new shiny enclaves. I don't see any safeguards for labor in that formula. Do I think that somehow China is selflessly offering its expertise to Africa? No, I don't. I'm not sure I would. Maybe you would call it a kind of neo-colonialism. Maybe you would not. Maybe you would just call it what it. Maybe you would look at it for what it is now. Just look at the evidence there. It's not to say that there's not something, there couldn't be something productive about African-Chinese partnership. That some of the design work that I've been doing is trying to think about how African cities and countries make a better bargain with their assets. It's clear that China's made a calculation that there's some benefit for them in the partnership. How best to benefit the host country? What's the calculation on the other side? That concerns me.
I see that free zones, special economic zones, they're quite established, and it's rather easy to sell them to countries under this label, I feel at least. And I remember the case of the special economic zone in Sri Lanka, where China gave a loan to the previous Sri Lankan government, and they were not able to service the loan, and now China took over the whole port area with the attached free zone. It's, I think, on a 99-year concession, but it's called a free zone, so it's a lot more nice sounding to politicians. That's, if you would call it a treaty port, which would be like a very sensitive term, or some foreign concessions, which also would be very sensitive for political views. So I feel it can include a lot of different things. Like many free zones, special economic zones, are basically just industrial parks. Some other ones are much more like whole cities. Some even have their own legal system, like in Dubai, the Dubai International Financial City. So it can include a lot of things, but it seems to be that you can quite easily package what you want under this label and then sell it to other governments. At least I feel like this.
I mean, nothing is more sort of hilarious than the idea that these are outposts of the free market. These are outposts of a manipulated market. So free has never been the right word here. And so even the kinds of design work that I'm often proposing is about how to create interdependency, that there's more empowerment in the interdependency of interdependencies between the assets and needs of a city like Nairobi, or than to try to package the idea as one related to freedom or convenience or some kind of unencumbered, lubricated situation. It is unencumbered and lubricated for some, but not so much for others.
But then, if you see that there's so many projects of those free zones, and as you said, it's like trying to build shiny enclaves. But then it's surprising that most of these projects actually go nowhere. They don't generate profits for the economy. They don't even generate those shiny skylines. They're basically just stuck. They build maybe a few industrial sheds, but then nothing happens. What do you think are the reasons why some of them, like in Dubai, become very big, very successful, or like Shenzhen, and then we have so many of them, maybe 80-90%, who basically don't go anywhere, non-regarding if they are considered to be good or bad, but they just don't go anywhere.
Well, I mean, I think it is probably, as your previous question suggested, that there are economies that are overextending their abilities, taking on loans that can't yet handle, to be able to provide infrastructure for that's attractive to foreign investment. Whereas, Dubai, when they were going to provide access to their assets, they made a much better bargain. So, they said, if you're going to have access to our oil and gas resources, or you're going to have a defense contract with us, you have to, that they essentially curated investment in other industries that they needed. That if you wanted access to their oil and gas, you had to invest in an offset industry, fish farming, desalination, aluminum production, something like that. So it's the very things that Dubai did to kind of ratchet forward, using their assets to gain momentum, which is what I'm suggesting that the developing countries do. Dubai also has an enormous cushion of capital that it can withstand. It could withstand something like the 2008 financial crisis, but only because it had a very wealthy neighbor in Abu Dhabi to kind of bail it out. But it's clear, even when I've been at conferences for free zone developers, once I tried saying, well, I don't know if you know this. I was lying, but I said, I don't know if you know this, but all the smartest free zone entrepreneurs now are not building ex-urban enclaves. Instead, they're finding it much safer, a lot more synergy, a lot more security, et cetera, to build in existing cities, to invest in existing cities. And it was hilarious. The response from a few bankers was that yeah, they'd encountered so much failure in these attempts to build cities out of whole cloth, and that in fact it would be better to build in existing cities. I was bluffing, but I just wanted to see what they would say, and the response was interesting.
I feel it's always very difficult to build in new cities. The most ambitious programs, at least that I know of, seem to be in Saudi Arabia, where there's the King Abdullah economic city, which is already a bit older. And the last guess I heard, maybe they plan to invest up to 100 billion US dollars to create a completely new city on the coast of the Red Sea, where there was only desert, which would be the biggest investment project in human history, probably the biggest single one. And the last guesses I heard, there were only around 5,000 people living there, which seems to be very inefficient given the huge amount of investment. But then, rather surprisingly, the new crown prince of Saudi Arabia recently, just a few weeks ago, announced the creation of NEOM, which made a lot of headlines, which is up to half a trillion US dollar worth of investment. Very big. There's nothing at all there now. He signed up the former CEO of Siemens, one of the biggest managers in the world of industry and business, to develop it. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's just megalomania? Or, so on the other hand, some people say if you want to reform a country as Saudi Arabia, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to adopt existing cities, to negotiate with people about trying out new policies like giving women the rights to drive, which now finally came through, but which was already also spearheaded in the King Abdullah economic city. Isn't it sometimes also good trying to just build something new, which is optional, which sidesteps vested interests, and you can just try it out, and if people like it, then it can spread back. So like it's a way to experiment without stepping on anyone's shoes.
Yeah, the NEOM project is remarkable. Well, I suppose it underlines the habit, which is it's now become kind of more than just a kind of global contagion. This kind of city building thing, it's become a habit of mind that you can use cities to that you can create these new environments, new approaches to politics, and so on. And that the new city has always had that responsibility from the intentional communities of defecting religious groups in the New World, or to Spain's laws of the Indies in the 16th century. There's always that idea that kind of you can create a formation in real estate, and that will create the new world, the new political disposition, the new social rules, and so on. I mean, the NEOM looks like the toy of a very rich prince.
But then I also feel it's very interesting when people try to create those new things. It's always has some kind of frontier mentality, trying to develop something new. And there have been recently very new kind of ideas, which also have been based on this free zone experiment. So one of them would be seasteading, where people try to build new cities on the open sea. And one institute that's trying to pursue this to recently sign an agreement with French Polynesia in the Pacific, where they got their own special economic zone on the water to develop a floating city in the special economic zone. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that has any chance of going anywhere, of being successful?
It's quite common. There are these kinds of ideas are always around. The giant mile-long cruise ship that you live in called the Freedom Ship, or the seasteading phenomenon, or something. It's again, it is about this kind of cultural fallacy surrounding the idea of freedom, at least in my view. NEOM is interesting, for its attempts to change cultural mores. It's also one thing I find interesting about it is the proposed bridge also to the African continent. Across those two, connecting back across. I don't know what that means. I mean, it is an indication of different kinds of alignment, political alignment. So it's not just, and it is as we've been saying, something that's attempting to kind of change cultural mores or give another kind of power to the younger people in Saudi Arabia, kind of almost brand the desired global lifestyle of younger people in Saudi Arabia. So that there's much more going on there than in the kind of freedom ship seasteading kind of projects.
There's another kind of project I would like to talk with you about, and I've been a bit involved myself. So there are a few NGOs pushing ideas of refugee cities, or another one is called refugee nations, which look at the situation of displaced people in the world. There are, according to UN statistics, over 60 million now, and you have the big issue that conflicts last a lot longer than people originally think. So people are a long time in exile, have children, so you have second, third generation refugees, and usually in the host countries that host them, they're not allowed to work, sometimes going to school, all those very normal kind of things, very limited, basically contained in refugee camps, and they're usually very horrible. So many people rather live basically illegally just somewhere. And so the idea is that people say it's a state that's very unacceptable, which is a waste of human potential, does not allow these people to develop their lives, to create around those refugee camps or other places in the host nations small enclaves where refugees are allowed to work. Because typically there's a lot of opposition if the host government would grant the refugees to work. That's why they don't do it. And so there would be one way of using this special economic zone approach, which basically says you have a geographically defined area in which a different set of rules applies, and you have one new experimental policy, and this experimental policy is giving refugees the right to work. And the idea is you don't have this big backlash that you would have if you have it on a national scale, but you still marginally increase the options that refugees have, and maybe they can have a more long-term solution to find work there, to maybe even build a new city to settle down. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've been looking at over the years a number of sorts of projects which are almost saying, well, two can play at this game. If you're going to have these so-called free zones that are outside of law, then and if the incredible legal and logistical ingenuity can be deployed for so-called free trade, where is the logistical and legal ingenuity for being able to, if we can kind of move billions of products and millions of cheap laborers and tourists around the world with all this legal and logistical ingenuity, where's the ingenuity for just moving 65, X million, or not 65, but X million people away from, atrocities in Syria, or where's the legal logistical ingenuity for relieving the situation of other people who need to move. It's remarkable that all there is a kind of nation state, the dumb on-off button for granting or denying citizenship, or an NGocracy that provides as its best idea storage in a refugee camp lasting on average 17 years. So I'm all for turning the tables on that. So far, of course, the minute you think about it, you think, yeah, and what could possibly go wrong? There could be incredible dangers and abuses in a situation like that. There is a history of people who are migrating, making their own kinds of enclaves. Somebody like Hakim Bey sort of romanticized the idea with, the pirate enclaves of North Africa, that there was, that these were truly cosmopolitan cities that drew people from everywhere, and they kind of, had their own rules, and there was honor among thieves and so on. It was a kind of free zone, temporary autonomous zone. I guess I would love to believe in that kind of cosmopolitanism. So far, the schemes for making these kinds of cities have been, I guess, questionable. And right now I'm working on something which is kind of different, which is about a way for people who are migrating, who never wanted the citizenship from any one particular country, can continue to move around the world, not just resettle in one free zone enclave, but string together numbers of short-term visas for another kind of cosmopolitan mobility that's built on one-to-one relationships with people in different countries. And so that's on my mind now as something that, again, not about freedom, but about obligation, about one-to-one connections. I'm wondering if I'm thinking about that as potentially a safer, more secure option if the movements can be, if the strings of movements can be accredited to as an especially prized credential, education credential, training credential, etc. So we're working on that right now for a project for the Venice Biennale. It's a global platform called Many.
It sounds like a very interesting project. I hope to hear more about it when once you presented it at the Biennale. I find it interesting. We have quite many historical precedents for this kind of open cities, like the pirate enclaves, or other examples to my mind are places like Hong Kong, Shanghai, which were colonial outposts, but were completely open and were mainly settled by Chinese refugees. In Shanghai, also during the Second World War, refugees coming from Europe who made use of the no visa required system, that you could settle down there, or the Tangier International Zone. And quite often those places had a bad reputation because as everyone could go there, there was a lot of crime, a lot of mafia, but in the other end, people had no other options to go. So I personally think it's good because you have this other option. Nowadays we have a situation where the whole world is much more oligopolized, monopolized by nation states, and there is basically no territory at all. It's not under the control, the border control of nation states, and it seems to be really difficult to pull away a short layer and have some place where people can go without passports, or who cannot go anywhere. But then on the other hand, it seems much easier to pull a bit away of those layers of regulation of the nation states when it comes to setting up free zones that are tax exempted, or for free capital movement. But in the end, it's like people that are very important, and I think it would be much more meaningful if we could add this dimension of allowing people to go somewhere as well. But somehow that seems to be a much bigger barrier in the current system of nation states than for capital. And it seems it's also a historical anomaly, because usually we had a lot of more free cities or the Hanseatic League or bigger empires, so even nation states were much more laissez-faire regarding migration than they used to be nowadays.
Yes, I suppose when one thinks about those, the idea of a autonomous city for refugees, things would have to be organized. I mean, things would have to be organized in such a way, if it were anything like that were to be successful, things would have to be organized in such a way that it's avoided the obvious specter of that just becoming another camp, another camp, but one without any resources. Is it just another means of containment, or does it truly have the sort of privileges that we give to goods and tourists and free trade, or is it just another way of sort of corralling the other in a place with no resources?
And camps usually have a lot more oppression, in the sense that people are not allowed to work, that people are denied a lot of the basic rights of human and economic agency. If you would have an autonomous area, you might not even need so many resources, because people could work, they could create themselves, they could build something, they can save, invest, they can build something by themselves. All those things that in the current system they're basically stripped of, which seems to be very unnatural and leading to the situation that you have those over 60 million people who basically cannot legally do anything at all.
Right. And I mean, in making this many sites that are talking about, we've looked at other diasporas and how they have worked, and how people who are moving, are, when they are allowed to bring their work and their ability to, invest and create and so on, looking at the European diaspora during the Second World War to any number of places around the world, to Shanghai, to Sao Paulo. It's almost as if when there is a way to enter into the economy, and again, sometimes it seems as if it's with a one-to-one connection, where there's a family member, there's somebody, there's a kind of community that's transferring to another part of the world that shares the same culture, religion, skill, something, that there's an enormous chance for success with that. But no, I mean, it's exactly that idea of the sideline talents, the inability to work, the inability to exchange, which we're looking at with this many sites, that we're trying to do a kind of matchmaking between those sideline talents and the enormous needs of many other people in the world. So it's a kind of need to need matchmaking. No hosts, no haves and have-nots. So I'm also interested in that as incredibly information rich in its exchanges. It just dispositionally, it seems like it might be more information rich than another enclave, if you follow me.
I think now we touched on many topics. Maybe as a last question to finish off, what do you think is the future of free zones? Where do you see it going?
Well, I'll tell you where I don't know where it's going. I can observe two things. One, it's mutated wildly over the last 30 or 40 years. So the fact that it is so elastic, that it's gone from kind of a chain link fence warehousing compound to a megacity in that period of time. I keep hoping that the next kind of fiction about what it will be is powerful. I keep hoping that it's the idea that the zone's kind of aspiration to be a city might be the germ of its own reversal, that to really be a city is to locate in the existing city, to take advantage of that kind of cosmopolitan mobility, and that's the rumor that I would like to spread.
Thank you very much for your time, for the interesting discussion.
我的脸皮最厚，啤酒喝不够，爱吃肉，其实喝多了我也难受。